News Central now at this hour begins in West Africa, where President Bola Tinubu will today hold a closed-door meeting with state governors at the Aso Rock Villa in Abuja to find solutions to the economic crisis in the country. And this comes as northern traditional rulers and the Nigerian Bar Association decry the hardship in the country caused by fuel subsidy removal, which had resulted in higher transport costs and food inflation. The traditional rulers and the NBA have asked the federal government to quickly address the situation. Two presidency officials are reported to have stated that the meeting with the governors would be held before the president's departure to Ethiopia for the African Union meeting. The Nigerian government has signified plans to establish a national commodity board as a solution to the escalating food inflation in the country. The board will be given the mandate to assess and regulate food prices, as well as maintain a strategic food reserve for stabilizing prices of crucial grains and other food items. Vice President Kashim Shettima made this known at the opening of a two-day high-level strategic meeting on climate change, food systems, and resource mobilization at the banquet hall of the State House in Abuja. Other stakeholders praised the President Tinubu for this proposed initiative aimed at curbing the hyperinflation in the country.
The short-term strategy entails revitalizing food supply through specific interventions like the distribution of fertilizers and grains to farmers and households to counteract the effects of subsidy removal, fostering collaboration between the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security and the Federal Ministry of Water Resources for efficient farmland irrigation, ensuring year-round food production, and addressing price volatility by establishing a national commodity board. This board will continually assess and regulate food prices, maintaining a strategic food reserve for stabilizing prices of crucial grains and other food items. I wish to emphasize that the government is not unaware of the fears being expressed in some quarters about the plight of farmers, particularly regarding their security while working on their farms. I wish to assure you that we will engage our security architecture to protect the farms and the farmers so that farmers can return to the farmlands without fear of attacks.
Where we have gathered key stakeholders from across Nigeria and from all over the world to commence the resource mobilization conversation for smallholder farmers in Nigeria and Africa, while underpiling the urgency of action required in the face of the current and growing food crisis.
The basis of all of this is integration. Integration is the key to our future and to our progress. And being a former Prime Minister of Niger, it is extremely important for me to reiterate in a very clear manner that there is no other way than going towards a strong regional integration.
Nigeria seeks to raise 2.5 trillion naira in its second FGN bonds auction. A Debt Management Office, DMO, in a circular issued on Wednesday, states that the offering consisted of 1.25 trillion naira with a maturity date of February 2031 and 1.25 trillion naira with a 10-year tenure. FGN savings bonds are part of the domestic borrowing plan of the federal government, and last year, the federal government raised about 7.06 trillion naira from the fixed income market. This year, the federal government has projected its new borrowings to hit 7.83 trillion naira. President Bola Tinubu had sought approval from the National Assembly for about $8.69 billion and 100 million euros as part of the external borrowings plan for 2022 to 2024. We'll come back to business-related stories in Nigeria much later, but for now, let's head to United Kingdom, where we understand that official data showed on Thursday that Britain has entered recession after recording two successive quarters of negative economic growth in the second half of last year. The Office for National Statistics said in a statement that gross domestic products shrank by 0.3% in the fourth quarter of 2023 after contracting 0.1% in previous 3 months. Now, this meets the technical definition of a recession. Economists are forecasting a 0.1 decline in gross domestic product between October and December. And this would follow a 0.1% contraction in previous 3 months after a downward revision against zero growth initially estimated. A contraction in the fourth quarter would mean the UK tipped into a technical recession as defined by 2 or more quarters in a row of falling GDP. Let's also tell you that as new figures show that UK is in recession with 2 successive quarters of fallen GDP in Q3 and Q4 in 2023, the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, says that the economy is more resilient than most people predicted and insists that the government will stick to their guns on its plan to bring down inflation. News of recession comes as voters go to the polls in 2 by-elections on Thursday, with the Conservatives fearful of losing one-time strongholds in Wilborough, central England, and Kingswood in the southwest.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritised tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation, but also for families when there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher. It's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down, real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling, and that will be a very important relief.
And to talk about this, I've been joined live on the news by Gospel Obele, a chief economist, Report Card Limited. Good afternoon, Gospel. It's a pleasure to have you join me.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me today.
All right. Now, official data shows that Britain has entered recession after recording 2 successive quarters of negative economic growth in the second half of last year. What factors would you think contributed to this economic contraction in the UK?
Well, thank you. First, to establish that this is a global issue in terms of the factors about to mention. The hike of interest rates, which would generally, have strengthened the financial markets or investors' markets base, or capital markets, as the case may be. But usually, that came up at the risk of the real sector, and to a very large extent led to what we term as the cost of living crisis. And when you juggle that as well with how inflation has evolved, due to the recent geopolitical risk, that we've seen globally. All right. So inflation and interest rates coming together has impacted to a very large extent on consumer spending. And if you look at the numbers very closely, retail, wholesale, manufacturing, are key major sectors that have contracted very, very much. And these are sectors where you have consumers, constantly engaging or interacting with economic dynamics on the daily. Or great to say that these are sectors where you have on the upper side of the value chain suppliers or producers who have had to increase prices by virtue of disruptive supply chain dynamics from the geopolitical risk. So safe to say that increasing or weaker consumer spend and pressure on businesses to sort of stay alive as a result of the cost of doing business and all of that has led to a drawback on the economy, and invariably led to this consistent decline in terms of GDP growth, economic activities, as the case may be. And this is also to say that these issues have been, despite the fact that inflation has dropped significantly, we've also seen that the dynamics of the cost of living has evolved, meaning that when people over the months have had to pay more monies or more parts of their income or spend more parts of their incomes trying to buy food, buy fuel, cover energy costs and all that. And there's also a constant increase across these line items. It means that even if the inflation rate drops, you still have a strong cost of living impact within communities, within societies, within the core ecosystem of buying and selling and facilitating of goods and services, which impacts on the direct input or the direct numbers that goes into GDP or growth construct. So it's a challenge that has sat very deeply within the realities and dynamics of people who live in the UK and to a very large extent globally.
All right, Gospel, do you think the recession, threatens the future membership of UK in the European Union? Is there possibly, a risk of Brexit 2.0?
Well, it's a conversation, it's a developing story, as we've seen. And the fact that these whole dynamics doesn't just start or end the UK, it's also spreading across Europe. We've seen, growing monetary tightening concerns, even by the ECB and even by the Bank of England and the Fed as well, and also the consistent drive to tame inflation. So it's more or less a global argument, and which is just unfortunate that the UK has been one of the earliest within the quote-unquote Eurozone and the core UK dynamic bloc, to officially, get into recession. So will it impact on Brexit dynamics? Of course it will, but I would say at this stage it's a developing story. Then again, because there are many more events into the 2024 fiscal year that would shape how that story evolves and how quick the UK is able to bounce back from these realities.
All right, let's talk solutions now. How do you think the government can address this issue to avoid a rising case of inflation?
Well, like I mentioned earlier on, the inflation is currently almost being halved. The issue has been that you have a cost of living block, that consumers and producers, manufacturers, businesses are living with on a daily. You also have a situation where, the roller coaster impact of interest rates increase or holding decisions have also impacted on access to finance and ability to access lending, for business, as the case may be, and also triple down on supply chain dynamics. So what I see to a very large extent happening here is sort of introducing some more sector focus or supply side interventions to reduce impact on businesses, as well as scaling those impacts for local businesses in communities as well. So what has happened over time has been, growing welfareist in quotes interventions, to reduce the impact of the cost of living crisis on individuals at local community levels, which is good and which is a necessary condition as it were. But we also need to move to something more sufficient and sustainable within, the mainstream of economic activities, which is supporting local businesses, which is empowering more people to start businesses, empowering more businesses to create more jobs, and we can only do this by also relieving the bulk of the value chain pressure, that impacts on the ability to do business and to start with. So interventions have to be more strategic along the value chains, have to enable for more job creation, and also have to sort of improve on the social welfareist dynamics of the UK. So take, for instance, now individuals are having to pay more in energy bills, having to pay more. House rents have generally increased because of interest rates as well. Mortgages have also increased. So there is a reduction in the demand side of how things are evolving. So it just makes sense to begin to think of not just welfareist focused approach, but also sector-based interventions that can be used to support local businesses, support mainstream suppliers and all of that. And with that, we can begin to find a pathway to bouncing back in the real sense.
All right, let's bring it back home to Nigeria. What lessons can we learn from what's going on in the UK?
Well, for Nigeria, it shows that Nigeria is a much more volatile economy to start with. But the upside has been the strength of the numbers, in spite of what policies are the main in the state of play. But safe to say as well that what's happening currently in the UK should also be a cue for policy stakeholders, senior level government, and even citizens and folks in the Nigerian space. And that's because recession is not far-fetched as well. And also the concept of recession, as much as it's being described on the lines of technical definitions, it's also safe to say that the cost of living impact in itself is creates an experience of recession already before the GDP number says it in a sense. So I've always claimed that GDP growth numbers are sort of reactive in terms of in response to what the citizens are feeling and experiencing at the moment. So it's safe to say that people may have already started experiencing recessions before the numbers already picked that up. All right. So and that's the case to a very large extent in Nigeria. So we need to rethink in terms of going to market on necessary conditions of what welfare packages can be introduced, but then using that as a leverage to introduce sector-focused interventions to relax or reduce the pressure for local businesses and institutions who are directly interfacing in the landscape. So it needs to show that Nigeria needs to probably also get its act together when it comes to policy response, and to also understand the fact that it's not far-fetched from quote-unquote either a recession by GDP growth figures or a recession by worsening case of the standard of living, which we're currently experiencing right now.
And that's a fine place to wrap up. Thank you so much for your expertise on the news. Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, thank you once again. Now let's head back to Nigeria, but to some education matters, where the Academic Staff Union of Universities has said the proposed education loan scheme will keep students in permanent debt. According to a statement on Thursday after its National Executive Council meeting at Niger Delta University, Wilberforce Island, Bayelsa State, ASU said it was surprised by the report it received on the failed promises of the Bola Tinubu-led administration towards addressing the issues that forced the union to embark on a nationwide strike action of February to October 2022. Also insisted that a student loan scheme being promoted by international money lending agencies such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank would starve public universities of funding. The statement adds that the NEC of ASU reiterated its rejection of the student loan scheme. Thank you for staying tuned. In West Africa, where no fewer than 60 members of Nigeria's House of Representatives are seeking amendments to the 1999 Constitution to transition from the presidential to parliamentary system of government. Led by lawmaker representing Lagos State under the All Progressive Congress, Wale Raji, the lawmakers identified the need for reducing the cost of government and robust policy debate, among others, as some of the reasons for demanding a return to the parliamentary system of government. The lawmakers, drawn from different party affiliations, anchored their positions on the need to adopt a parliamentary system of federal, the state and local government levels. Addressing the press conference at the National Assembly complex on Wednesday, the spokesman for the sponsors and members representing Kebe, Tambuwal constituency, Sokoto State, Abdusamad Dasuki, said that when passed, it will significantly impact the national political landscape of the country. And to talk about this, I've been joined live in the studio by Okiki Adeniran, a legal practitioner and as well as a political analyst. Good afternoon. Glad to have you join me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
All right, let me kick off with your impression on the call by the 60 lawmakers for Nigeria to transition to a parliamentary system of government. What do you make of that?
Well, sincerely, I believe that this is the right way for us to go. You know, as it is, we've tried a particular system for a very long time. And the truth be told, we've not gotten the result that we desire. And it won't be bad having another system. As a matter of fact, the parliamentary system is, personally, I believe is the best, you know, and this system, you know, it gives the electorate power, you know, as much as possible. If you look at the parliamentary system of government, the system at which the prime minister is selected, the system at which the legislators are selected, all of them in the same. If you look at all of them together, it gives you an idea that it's an all-inclusive government. So if we have such a system, what we're expecting is just that we're expecting basically accountability from the political office holders. You know, as we speak, what we have on ground now, it's a presidential system of government where we have the president, we have the governors, we have the executive, the legislative council, and just like what they've said, it's taking a lot. It's expensive to run, and you know, having this system change will not be bad. And let me add that when we have this kind of system, it means that the minority will be included. It means that by the time we elect our legislators, what will then happen will be that they will be accountable to the people that elected them. And it won't be the case that we have presently, where we have a couple of people at the National Assembly. Once they are elected, they forget about their constituencies, and then, you know, until 4 years again, they go back to them to go and, you know, give them some things and get elected again. But in this case, you can be sure that when you have a lot of, when you have this kind of system, the electorate will have their power to elect, to ensure that they keep them accountable. That's one. Then two, in fact, if by the time a prime minister is selected or ministers, they can, you can be sure that the members of that particular arm of government, the legislative arm of government, will ensure that the person that is selected as the prime minister will be, accountable to them, and they can actually do what they need to do at the proper time. I'll give you an example. If today, for example, we have a prime minister, and there's a couple of things that needed to be changed, and the person is actually not doing what is proper, what is right, it won't be very difficult to call the person back and to elect another person, which we cannot have now. In the sense that to impeach a sitting president is very difficult unless we want to deceive ourselves.
Now, having said all that, do you think transitioning to a parliamentary system of government is enough, or has any consequential impact on addressing the sufferings or hardship in Nigeria?
Yes, I'm very, very positive about this. It will help us. Like I said, we have tried a system, the presidential system of government, at different times, in fact, for a long time, and I feel that it is time for us to have a change. It is time for us to look into this part and ensure that it sees the limelight. If we change and we have this, like I said before, we can be sure that we'll have more youth in government. Because now what will happen will be that once you are elected by the electorate at the constituency, you can get to the house, and then even if you're a minority can team up and form a consensus and bring up.
Yeah, apologies to butt in there, but with a presidential system of government,
yes,
what stop Nigeria from having more youths in government?
So the system we have right now is a system where we have parties, and from one party you have to get what do you call it? You have to be elected from the party, and then you have to be voted at the general election. And for you to be the president, you can be sure that you need to have a very good stamina. In the sense that you need to win a particular number of states before you can be the president. But in this case, if you want to become a member of the Legislative Council, you understand what I'm saying? You can then team up, even if it's a minority. You can have a consensus. You can team up. And then, before you know it, the person is selected as a prime minister from the house. And, just like I said, it will, push a lot of people into politics, youth into politics, and ensure that, that things are done properly the way it's supposed to be. And electorate can be sure that, yes, their vote will count, and, they can hold people that they voted, and ask questions. So that's what I think.
All right, thank you so much for your time on the news. Okiki Adeniran, legal practitioner. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
And now moving on to another story. Nigeria's Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabo, says Nigeria cannot continue to subsidize electricity, adding that the nation must begin to move towards a cost-effective tariff model. The minister said this comes as the country is currently indebted to the tune of 1.3 trillion naira to generating companies and $1.3 billion owed gas companies. Adelabo, who addressed the press conference in Abuja on Wednesday, said only 450 billion naira was budgeted for subsidy this year, but the ministry needs over 2 trillion naira for subsidy. He said the state government will now be allowed to generate power independently to supply power to their states. News Central now continues in West Africa, where international investors greeted the removal of Ghana's finance minister with caution on Wednesday as they brace for a prospect of more delays to the restructuring of the country's overseas debt ahead of national elections in December. The debt restructuring talks are now expected to be entirely derailed by Mohamed Amin Adam, the Minister of State in the Finance Ministry, replacing Ken Ofori-Atta. However, due to the increased uncertainty, the value of Ghana's Eurobonds has declined. Earlier, David Yormodi, economist and data scientist, spoke to us on these developments.
We have been calling for the removal of this minister for about 5 years, about 5 years now, all because he has mismanaged the economy. if you look at what he came to meet, he came to meet an economy that was growing at 3.4% and expected to grow at 8% in 2017. And indeed, we recorded 8.1%. Today, that economy is growing at less than 2%. He came to meet a debt stock of about 122 billion. Today, our debt stock is around 575 billion. He came to meet an import cover of about 4 months. Today, we have less than 1.5 months import cover. So he has mismanaged every aspect of our economy. Inflation was around 15.4%. We expected to hit a single-digit inflation. Today, we've gone up to about 54% and now hovering around 23%.
In Central Africa, 2 South African soldiers have been killed in a mortar strike in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Announcing the deaths, the South African military said 3 more soldiers were wounded in the incident on Wednesday near the eastern city of Goma. The death marks the first fatalities for South Africa since it began to deploy 2,900 soldiers in eastern DR Congo in mid-December. The troops were sent as part of Southern African Regional Force, including soldiers from Malawi and Tanzania, tasked with helping DRC government forces fight M23 rebels. The mostly Tutsi M23 group has seized vast swathes of North Kivu since emerging from dormancy in late 2021. The region has been wrecked by violence in decades since regional wars in the 1990s. In the east of the continent, Kenya said that more than 12 million children in the country are affected by risks associated with climate shocks and stressors. The Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry said out of the number, 2.4 million of them live in arid and semi-arid counties where the impact of climate change is extremely high. According to the ministry in a statement, these children's survival faces imminent threats from climate change impact. Some of the severe effects of climate change that affect children include diseases like cholera caused by flooding and malnutrition due to drought. This is also displacement from their homes due to both drought and flooding caused by heavy rainfall, with 2 weather events having become common in Kenya in the past years. A Kenyan teacher is currently attempting to set the Guinness World Record for the longest science lesson taught by an individual. Rose Tata Wekesa is aiming to teach for at least 50 hours. She is a biology and chemistry teacher at St. Austin's Academy, an international school in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, but is undertaking the challenge at the Multimedia University of Kenya, about 16 kilometers from the city. She hopes to continue her attempt until Friday. She also mentioned that she has stayed awake for 44 consecutive hours to prepare her body for the challenge. A second confession statement by accused number 2 in the Senzo Mayowa murder trial within a trial is the focus of the court proceedings at the Pretoria High Court. Accused number 2, Bongana Ntanzi, says he was not assaulted before signing the confession, but he was only assaulted later after police realized he had not initiated the pages. He's still under cross-examination to prove whether the confession statements were made freely and voluntarily. Meanwhile, the state has accused Bongana Ntanzi of fabricating and continuously tailoring his version during cross-examination in the Senzo Mayowa trial. The state also alleges that accused number 2 has been given contradictory testimonies from that of his representative, which poses questions around his evidence. South Africa has made an urgent request to the World Court to intervene following Israel's attacks on Rafah in southern Gaza. And this comes as international pressure builds on Israel to end its military offensive in the city. In a statement issued on Tuesday, a presidency spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, said South Africa had made an urgent request to the ICJ to consider whether Israel's decision to extend its military operation in Rafah required the court to use its authority to prevent further violations of Palestinian rights in Gaza. The request comes just over a month after the country presented its genocide case against Israel at the ICJ in The Hague. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi received his Brazilian counterpart, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, on Thursday in a visit that marks 100 years of diplomatic relations between both countries. In their Cairo meeting, Sisi and Lula will discuss the special Egyptian-Brazilian relations and their joint coordination in international events and forums. Lula's visit to Egypt, his first as president, gains special significance as Egypt is now a member of the BRICS bloc co-founded by Brazil. Egypt aims to boost investment and trade with state of the bloc and encourage the use of local currency in trade, among them amid a foreign currency shortage that the country has been facing over the past 2 years. Lula's visit to Egypt is also taking place shortly after Brazil invited Egypt to attend the G20 meetings during Brazil's presidency of the group. And that's all on the news at this hour. But before we go, let's take a look again at some of the major stories. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu to meet with state governors to proffer solutions. South African soldiers killed in peacekeeping mission. Britain enters technical recession. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen and follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch us live on DSTV, channel 422, Star Times, channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Adebola Adeduba.